It may come as a surprise to discover that the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy Air Forces operated aircraft from the Third Reich during the Second World War. This was such owing to the increasingly friendly relations that were maintained between Germany and Japan during the mid to late 1930s, which culminated in Japan joining the Axis powers on the 27th of September 1940. Initially, Germany's Far East trading ally from the 1920s into the 1930s was nationalist China, with the latter being an importer of post-First World War German firearms and aircraft. Unlike China, however, Japan was a rich nation with a well-developed aircraft industry of its own. It may be argued that cooperation between Germany and Japan was inevitable, which would lead to Japan becoming a major market for German aircraft, including the licensed building of aircraft types, while Germany became a major importer of Japanese-produced raw materials and medicines. Before Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, which was launched in June 1941, Germany and Japan were able to trade overland via the Trans-Siberian Railway, as well as by sea. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union, trade by sea became the only route left open to Germany and Japan. For their part, the Allies attempted to enact a naval blockade of Germany. With the entry of Japan into the war in December 1941, a more intense effort was made by the Allies to enact blockades over the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. A combination of blockade runners and large cargo-carrying submarines managed to keep the trade flowing between Japan and Germany. Japan was interested in German fighter aircraft. One of the first German fighters sent to Japan were 3 Heinkel HE-100 fighters. The HE-100 was not adopted by the Luftwaffe despite the type being one of the fastest aircraft of its generation. Instead, the HE-100 lost out to the Messerschmitt Bf-109. The Heinkel HE-100 first flew in January 1938, and whilst proving to be outstandingly fast, it suffered from a lack of directional stability, while the Luftwaffe test pilots disliked the aircraft's high wing loading, which resulted in high landing speeds, while the ground crews disliked the tight cowling design, which made engine servicing difficult. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, Heinkel was permitted to look for foreign licensees for the design. Japanese and Soviet delegations visited the Heinkel factory in October 1939 and were impressed by the design. At the time, the Japanese were looking for new designs, notably for designs which utilised inline engines, an area which they had little experience. 3 Heinkel HE-100s were purchased for 1.2 million Reichmarks, along with a licence for production and a set of jigs for a further 1.6 million Reichmarks. The aircraft arrived in Japan in May 1940, whereupon they were assembled. Delivered to the Japanese Naval Air Force and accompanied by a Heinkel test pilot, Gerhard Nisch, who worked with Lieutenant Mitsuki Kofuda during testing and evaluation. The Japanese Navy was so impressed by the HE-100 during flight testing that they planned to put the aircraft into production. It was anticipated that the aircraft would be produced by Hitachi at a factory constructed in China. The war in Europe intervened and conspired to prevent the jigs and plans from arriving in Japan. Another Heinkel aircraft did, however, see service in Japan. The Heinkel HE-112 was a single-seat fighter designed in 1933 to meet a German Air Ministry specification for a single-seat interceptor. The HE-112 ultimately came second to the Bf-109. Nevertheless, 103 examples were produced, which saw service with the Condor Legion, Hungary and Romania. The Imperial Japanese Navy purchased 12 HE-112s, which it designated as the Heinkel AS-HE-1. The Heinkel HE-112 saw service in China during the Second Sino-Japanese War, but was phased out of service before the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 in favour of the Mitsubishi Zero. The Allies assumed that the type was still in service with the Japanese after December 1941 and assigned the HE-112 the reporting name Jerry. In 1941, Japan purchased 5 Messerschmitt Bf-109 E-7s from Germany for evaluation by the Imperial Japanese Army. While in Japan, the Bf-109s were painted with red Japanese roundels, while the leading edges of the wings were painted yellow. White numerals were also painted on the rudder of the aircraft, and a red band was painted around the rear of the fuselage. The Japanese evaluated the Bf-109 against captured Allied aircraft such as the Curtiss P-40, as well as against their own fighters including the Kawasaki Ki-61, the Nakajima Ki-43 and the Nakajima Ki-44. One of the Bf-109s was completely disassembled and closely studied by the Japanese, but the design was rejected and the option to license build the Bf-109 was foregone, with the Japanese believing that the Mitsubishi Zero was a better all-round aircraft. While not interested in the Bf-109, the Japanese were interested in the aircraft's engine, the Daimler-Benz DB601. Indeed, the DB601 would be built under license in Japan as a HEE-1A Atsuta, which was used to power early variants of the Yokosuka D4Y Suzy dive bomber and the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien. Expecting to encounter Japanese Bf-109s in combat, the Allies assigned the Bf-109 the reporting name Mike. While the Messerschmitt Bf-109 did not find gainful employment in Japanese service, another Messerschmitt design which did was the Bf-108 Typhoon. 21 examples of the Bf-108 were purchased by Japan, 15 of which saw service with Manchukuo Airways, a Japanese civilian-controlled entity which saw service in Manchuria. Dating from 1934, the Bf-108 was used by the Luftwaffe as a personnel transport and liaison aircraft and was utilised in the same role by the Imperial Japanese Army. A single example of the Focke-Wulf FW-190 was imported by the Japanese Army for evaluation. The FW-190 formed the backbone of the Luftwaffe's fighter force alongside the Bf-109 and, upon its introduction, outclassed Allied fighters. The FW-190, which was received by Japan, was the A5 variant, which was shipped to Japan in pieces aboard a U-boat and was flight tested against the Ki-84 and other single-seat Japanese fighters. The FW-190 was found to have better acceleration, a better rate of climb and a respectable armament than the Japanese counterparts. Indeed, overall, the Japanese rated the FW-190 better than the Bf-109 and the North American P-51C Mustang. Japanese records indicate that the FW-190 was handed over to a reconnaissance unit and that it saw some operational service in the Far East, but details are sketchy. Another aircraft which was delivered to Japan at the same time as the FW-190 was a single example of the Messerschmitt Me-210, a twin-engine fighter which also served as a ground attack aircraft. The Me-210 had a checkered service history with the Luftwaffe, with only 90 aircraft being constructed before it was quickly replaced by the Messerschmitt Me-410 Hornet. Extensively tested at the first Takikawa Air Army Arsenal, the type was not adopted by the Japanese. The Japanese also took receipt of an example of the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. Following evaluation, the Japanese decided not to adopt the Stuka for service aboard their aircraft carriers and put the aircraft on display in Tokyo in 1940. The Stuka was ultimately destroyed later in the war during an American air raid on the Japanese capital. German aircraft designs also influenced Japanese designs. The Heinkel HE-118 had been produced as a potential competitor to the Stuka. The Japanese imported 2 examples of the HE-118 for evaluation, the design of which influenced the Yokosuka D4Y Suzy. The Fiesler Fi-156 Storch liaison aircraft was licensed built in Japan as a Seiko Teigo. The Japanese were naturally interested in German rocket and jet technologies. As the war progressed, the long-distance supply route between Germany and Japan became increasingly tenuous. Despite this, an example of the Argus pulse jet engine, which equipped the V-1 flying bomb, was sent to Japan aboard the submarine I-29, contributed to the Kawanishi Baika pulse jet-powered kamikaze aircraft. Ultimately, the war ended before any examples of the aircraft could be built. Similarly, parts of the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, along with a copy of the flight operations manual for the aircraft and other documentation, were sent to Japan, which were used to reverse engineer the design to produce the Mitsubishi J-8M. Plans of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter were also sent to Japan, which were used to develop the Nakajima Kika. The Kika made its first and only flight on the 7th of August 1945. All of the aircraft sent by Germany to Japan ended up being destroyed in American bombing raids, scrapped by the Japanese, or captured by the American occupation authorities at the end of the war, whereupon they were scrapped. The question may arise as to what aircraft, if any, the Japanese supplied to Germany in kind. The only Japanese aircraft confirmed to have been operated by Germany during the Second World War were 3 Nakajima flying boats, which were purchased for service with the Kriegsmarine and which were flown on anti-submarine patrols from the German U-boat based at Penang, Malaya. It may be noted that while operated by Luftwaffe air crews, the flying boats retained their Japanese markings. Some photographs taken at the end of the war in 1945 show Mitsubishi Zeros, Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, and some trainer aircraft with what appear to be Luftwaffe crosses on their wings and fuselages. While the photographs are authentic and have not been doctored, they do not in fact depict Japanese aircraft in Luftwaffe service. Rather than being black, the crosses are in fact green and show Japanese aircraft surrendering in August 1945. Following the Japanese surrender, the Allied authorities ordered the Japanese to paint large green crosses on the fuselage and wings of their aircraft as a means of easy identification and a mark of surrender.
Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below.